Today we're going to be learning Nedarim Daf Yomi. We're going to start from a quick review of yesterday. So what we saw on Nun Zayin Amud Bet was Yishmael Ish Kfar Yama, or possibly his name. I actually figured out how to read this better. Either it was Yishmael Ish Kfar Yama or Yishmael Ish Kfar Di Yama. It's just a debate about what exactly his name was. He asked the following question: if I have an onion that I uprooted in the shmita year and I planted it in the 8th year, and then what grew became greater than what was the base. So what's the status? Do we say that what the base of it is nullified to the rest of what grew? Now, the question is really, right, well, most of the commentaries, again, there's a bit of a debate about this, exactly what the question is, but many commentators think the question is, since this was the basis for it, so this might have significance, and because of that, it's not nullified, because that's everything grew from there. So maybe it can't be nullified. So we saw a few answers. First, we had Rabbi Ami, who didn't know the answer. Then we have Rabbi Chanina Trita'ah, who said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that if we saw this onion of truma that you planted, and then it becomes permitted, we saw that what grows did nullify. To which Rabbi Zreika or Rabbi Yirmiyah says, what are you talking about? You can't say that because two people go against your one person and say the opposite. We had the case about the crossbreed and the vineyard, and we had the case about the grafting. With both those cases, we saw it wasn't nullified. So then Rabbi Ami himself tries to answer it from something Rabbi Yochanan said, which is if you take this amount of onions and that already had truma and maaser taken, and then you planted them, we take maaser based on the entire amount, which looks like it is nullified because we don't count it as if it was already fixed. To which the Gemara said, oh, that goes l'chumra. That's a stringency. So therefore, our case would be l'kula, and maybe l'chumra will say it's nullified, but not if you're going to actually want to be more lenient. So it's easier to be stricter than to be lenient. That's where we ended yesterday. So now we're up to source number 5. Ela min hada, the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Bet, Titania. Maybe you can learn it from here. It says in a Braita, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol davar sheyesh lo mitirin, anything that can be ultimately permitted down the road, as we saw in Daf Nun Bet, kigon tevel u'maser sheni v'hekdesh v'chadash. So tevel is things that we haven't taken tithes yet. So eventually, if you take the tithes out, it'll be permitted. Maaser sheni just needs to be brought to Jerusalem to be eaten. Hekdesh, sanctified items, which you can always redeem, and chadash, new wheat, which you can only eat after you bring the korban ha'omer, but you can eat it once the korban ha'omer is brought. So lo natnu bahem chachamim shiur. These cannot be nullified if they fall into another mixture of similar items. They're not nullified because eventually the whole thing will be permitted. But if it's something that will never be permitted, like kigon truma, u'truma maaser, v'chala, the orla, v'kilei keren, like truma, or the truma that you give, that the Levi gives from his maaser, the he got, or chala, or orla, one of the first 3 years of the fruits, as we discussed yesterday, kilei keren, the mixed crossbreed in the vineyard. All those are forbidden, and there's never a way to permit them. Well, therefore, if they come into a mixture of other things, natnu b'hem chachamim shiur, and different ones have different amounts, as we talked about before. Amrulo, they said to Rabbi Shimon, v'halo, shvi'it and lematirin. Now, shmita year comes. There's no, if it adds kedusha to it, it doesn't disappear. V'lona nuba chachamim shiur, and the rabbis didn't give it an amount, meaning it forbids it any amount. Titnan, how do we know? It says in the Mishnah, Hashvi'it osechet kol shehu b'mina. The shmita year forbids any small amount, okay, if it's with its own type. So now, here you see, shvid is not davar sheyesh lo matirin, and yet it forbids any amount. Amar lahen, so there goes your theory, Rabbi Shimon. Amar lahen, apani lo amarti ela lebi'u, aval achila b'no tentam. No, well, that was, when I said this, it was for bi'ur. And meaning, or that Mishnah is referring only to bi'ur. What does that mean? He basically creates a case of davar sheyesh lo matirin also in shmita. It's a little bit different, but it's similar. Shmita can be eaten, okay, shmita produce, but not only until the point that you have no more in the fields. Once it's no longer out there for your animals, you can't eat it either. And then you have to destroy it. So now he says, well, if shmita mixed in with other stuff that wasn't shmita, and then do we have to destroy the whole thing when the Zman Bior comes? So the answer is no, because theoretically you could eat it before the Zman Bior. So it has a way to be permitted, which is just eat it before that date comes. And therefore, that's a case where it will never be nullified. But la'achila, and here's the key line for us, because so far we haven't really connected to us. La'achila benoten tam. When it comes to eating, like let's say the date of Bior already passed, and now it falls into a pack of things that don't need to be Bior. So then it's canceled benoten tam. And here the commentaries say, to make this a little more similar, they say also that Mishnah could be referring to another case. Let's say I planted in the 6th year and it grew in the 7th year. So now does it go by shmita or does it go by, right, is it kedusha or not? So they say also, right, and then I have, let's say, something that was now the gidulim override the 6th year, right? And in other words, again, it would be benoten tam. If more was already grown, let's say it grows in the 6th year and it grew more in the 7th year. That's a better example. It already grew in the 6th year, now it's growing more in the 7th year. So do you say that it goes by, right? So for eating purposes, it will be benoten tam. Okay, it will be nullified. If the 6th year is greater, then it will be, the 7th year will be nullified to the 6th year. So, or the reverse. If the 7th year is greater, then the 6th year is nullified, and you can't say some of this is permitted in any way. So they say, Dilma, and then what do you see here? That there are real laws of nullification by the Shemitah year because it is nullified benoten tam. To which they say, Dilma hanami lechumra shane. But no, you could say that is also lechumra, okay? Because, right, you could say that it might mean that it's all obligated in Bior, let's say. You might have to destroy all of it now because if it's, you could say benoten tam, it could be the reverse. That if it has more of that, you're going to ruin, right, the whole pile of stuff that you thought maybe wasn't considered shmita. So in that case, it goes l'chumra, and therefore you can't learn from this anything. And lamin hada pasture. So let's try option number 6. Bitzalim sherdu alehem kshamim. We now have onions from the 6th year, and just one second. Right. I just want to clarify. In terms of the nullification being l'chumra, what they're really saying is if it's 6th year that grows in the 7th year, then what grows in the 7th year is greater. It nullifies, benoten tam, it nullifies the 6th year produce. And that goes l'chumra, basically. So now they bring another case, which we're going to see is going to go l'chumra and l'kula, and therefore they won't be able to reject it based on the rejection we keep using. So now they try this. Bitzalim sherdu alehem kshamim. So you have onions from the 6th year, and then more rain fell in the 7th year, and they grew more. Im hayu alim shalahem shchorim asurim. Now, if the leaves are darker, here it says black, but it really means darker. If the leaves are darker, then they're forbidden, because we assume that the nourishment came more from the 7th year. Horikan, if they're lighter, yarok really means green, but it really often means yellowish. If they're more yellowish, mutarim, they're lighter green. Then you can assume that the onions mostly grew from the previous year. Rabbi Chanina ben Antugi, he agrees with the concept. He disagrees with how to determine if you can lift them up. If the leaves, if they're very strongly attached to the leaves, that means that they're very solid and that they grew a lot this year. And then they're very connected to the leaves. And then it's going to be forbidden because it's from the 7th year. But that was 6 going into 7. If you take the same, and this would apply both to Rabbi Chanina and the Tanakama, which is, if you took those concepts though, and you did it 7th to 8th, it was planted in the 7th, and now in the 8th, the leaves are very dark, or they're very connected to the object, to the fruit, then they'll be mutarim. So this goes in both directions, where we basically say it gets nullified. Either 6 years nullified into 7th, or 7 is nullified into 8th. If it's 6th into 7th, it'll be l'chumra. If it's 7th into 8th, it'll be l'kula. It'll be more lenient because we won't treat it with sanctity. So what do you see here? That it's nullified. Even l'kula, which would answer our original question. Great. L'meimra, from here you can say, that the heter ones can override the forbidden ones, right? The kedusha ones, the ones that have sanctity. To which the Gemara rejects and says, no, dilma b'meduchanim. It's interesting. This means that you chopped up, but many people, it seems, would do this. They would chop up really small the pieces that they're planting from the 7th year in order to basically undermine the significance of the object. It's no longer important anymore. We kind of crushed it down to little pieces, in which case, that's why it's nullified. But if it were whole when you planted it or a big chunk, then it wouldn't be nullified necessarily. So it didn't really answer our question. Option number, source 7. Elamin hada detanya. Now we're going to go to Amud Bet. Following Braita, haminakesh etakut imakuti b'chasiyot. You were weeding with a kuti. A kuti is one of the shomonim, right? And they were known that they didn't take trumot maaser. We're going to see that here. And you were weeding in his field in chasiyot, which we're going to see are types of fields, onions, where onions grow, or loof, just some other vegetable, and garlics. Okay, we'll talk about what they are in a minute. But right now, you're menakesh with them. They seem to be things that have bulbs in them. Ochel mehem achilat arai umasran vada. So you can eat them while you're weeding without taking trumot maaser, because if you don't, before you have marmalacha, before it's in a pile, it's not obligated trumot maaser if you're just nibbling in the field. Okay, and that seems to be only if they give you permission, because usually if you're weeding, you're not really allowed to eat the fruits. It seems like he must have given you permission to eat. Umasran vada. Now, when they get to the stage of maaser, where they need maaser, you're definitely taking maaser here. They take maaser, not demai. Maybe they didn't take trumot maaser. You can be sure that the kuti didn't do trumot maaser, and therefore you're obligated entirely to do the maaser. In other words, it's not like a Rabbanit, well, we're not sure, so do it. Because it's always important, because remember, you can only do trumot maaser on something with the same level of obligation. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer, Im Israel chashud ala shvi'it, and this is the important part for our purposes, if you were weeding for someone who's a Jew, who is suspect that he planted things in the shmita year, l'motza'ei shvi'it mutal, you could eat them on, if it was in the 8th year. To which the Gemara says, now it must be that the 8th year overrides the 7th year, because otherwise how can we let you eat this? To which they say, maybe this is something where the seed disappears, and that's why we don't care. But then it wouldn't answer us about our question about the onion. To which the Gemara says you can't possibly say that, because Hatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita, Elu hen chasiyot kigon halufa shum v'absalim. The things that are specifically chasiyot, and that was what we were talking about, are things that are planted and then grow together with it, and the seed, it doesn't disintegrate. This is, by the way, a really good picture in the Koran of a seed, like a bean seed, that disintegrates as it goes on, showing the process. To which they say, just like we said last time, v'dilma b'medukanim, maybe they chopped it up before, maybe the guy was chashud al shvi'it, he chopped it up into little pieces, crushed it, before planting it, so that it wouldn't have the kedusha shvi'it on it anymore. To which they say, no, you can't expect, the guy was chashud al shvi'it katane, which means it's definitely not the issue here. He definitely didn't, the whole idea of crushing it up, and this proves what we said before, which is they crush it up on purpose in order to kind of have it lose its significance of Kedusha Shvi'it. But this guy who doesn't care about Kedusha Shvi'it, because he's chashud, he's suspect that he does planting even in the Shemitah year, for sure that wouldn't be the case. V'dilma b'ta'arovet, maybe it's that this got mixed up in a pile of other things, to which they say, Haminakesh katani, but you're talking about someone who's weeding. It's not mixed up in a pile of anything else. If it gets mixed up in a pile of another, then you could say, well, maybe it does have sanctity, but it got mixed up in another pile and it'll be nullified there. That can't be what we're talking about, because he was weeding. He wasn't dealing with a whole pile of stuff. To which seems like we finally have an answer to our question, and it seems to be saying it is nullified. To which the Gemara says, well, if you just proved it's nullified, this seems to be a question on those two sources we saw yesterday about the crossbreeding and the grafting, where we saw that it was a problem. They weren't nullified. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Shanya Shvi'it Ho'il V'Yisura Al Yedei Karka B'Telatanami Al Yedei Karka. Rabbi Yitzchak says no. These cases are different. These are shmita cases. Those are Kilei Kerem and maaser cases. Those are different. Why? Because Shvi, it's all about the ground. You're not allowed to work the land. The land has to rest. And therefore, the land growing in the 8th year actually can nullify the 7th year, even if it had sanctity, because it's already growing in the 8th year. It's the land that causes it all. To which the Gemara says, okay, well, in that case, hare maaser. One of the cases we had before was maaser. Isur yedei karka. The maaser also, it comes from the ground. How do we know? Because if I take something that I already took trumot maaser from and I planted it and it grows again, I have to take trumot maaser from the beginning. And that shows it's all about the land and not about what I planted. And yet, but yet we see that by planting it doesn't necessarily get rid of all the maaser. How so? Well, Tanya. Let's say I took, according to this Braita, litra maaser. I took a litra, that's like a liter, like a volume measurement of maaser tevel. Okay, maaser tevel shezara b'karka. Okay, I took something that wasn't, you hadn't, maaser tevel, the meaning is, sorry, 1 minute, right. I hadn't taken, sorry, give me 1 minute. Right, that's what it is, maaser tevel. Okay, it's maaser that I didn't take truma from. Okay, I'm a Levi, I have maaser, I didn't take truma from that maaser, and zara b'karka, and I planted it in the ground. V'hishbicha, I planted it in the ground in the 6th year, and it grew in the 7th year. Harehi ke'eser litrin, and now my 1 litra that I planted grew into 10. So one of it is maaser, right? So chayevet b'maaser. So that one, I have to take maaser still. That's that one that I planted still is obligated in truma. So I'd have to take my 1/10 that I'm supposed to give to the Kohen, because the Levi is supposed to take 1/10 of his produce to give to the Kohen. So out of this 10 litra, one of it I have to take 1/10 of to give to the Kohen. Uba shvit, the other 9 are actually kedusha shvit. They have sanctity of shvit, and they don't have maaser. Okay, they're not obligated maaser because in the shmita you're not. Votal litra, and that 1 litra that I'm obligated maaser. Now, what's the problem? It's all mixed up. I don't know which is which. Maaser I have to do a calculation. Take from other fruits the amount that I'm obligated here, because I don't know exactly which ones are obligated, which ones aren't, and you're not allowed to take from things that are obligated to fix things that aren't obligated. So, or the opposite. I wouldn't be able to take from things that are not obligated. If I took from, let's say by accident, part of it that was shmita and it wasn't the old one, it wouldn't work. Anyway, what do you see here? That the maaser isn't nullified. The fact that I planted maaser, you would think it grew again and it grew now in the shmita year, it would be exempt from truma maaser, but it's not. So we'll go one more line just because into tomorrow's daf, because we're already finishing this line. Amre, they say, no, maaser digun hu dekagarli. It's not the land that causes the maaser. It's when you make the pile. It's what we call gemar malacha, when it's ready. And it's the harvester who does it. It's not the land, and it's when you harvest it and when you put the pile together, that's what causes the obligation, and not the land itself. So you can't say it's the land and therefore the land nullifies it. And here, look, you see it's not nullified based on when it grew, because that's not what determines it. And therefore, we can still say that this source we brought about shmita, about nullification, might be unique to shmita, and we can't necessarily learn from there to other things, because there it's the land. Therefore it's all about when it grew and when it got nourished from the land. If it was during the 8th year, then it will nullify what was planted from the 7th year, and kedusha shvi will be no longer. But we can't necessarily learn from there to other things. Continue our topic. We're going to have more questions and more things in tomorrow's shiur. Wishing everyone a happy Hanukkah.